This is the Estonian Council on Foreign Relations short chat with Ulrike Franke, a senior fellow from ECFR. These series of short chats are organized back-to-back with the Lennart Meri conference. Ulrike, it's very nice to have you here. Let's talk about Germany, German foreign security policy and its role in the current wider security setting. When talking about the visibility and role of Germany in the global foreign affairs, recently there has been quite a bit of criticism of Germany's reluctance, Germany's and more specifically Chancellor Olaf Scholz's reluctance to take up a more dominant role in this, to shape more decisively the outcome of the wars in Ukraine or in the conflict in Gaza, as well as to have a stronger voice about what's to happen in the EU or NATO. How would you comment this criticism?
I think there's a bit of a paradox. I mean, let's talk about Germany's support for Ukraine and kind of Germany's effort on defense and security in particular. I think there's a bit of a paradox in that Germany is in fact the second most important, the second largest supporter of Ukraine when it comes to military, financial, humanitarian aid after the United States, and third if you count the EU institutions. So it is incredibly important. Germany has done and is doing a lot to support Ukraine. At the same time, I'm of course very aware that there's a lot of criticism, and I think a lot has to do with communication on the one hand, the fact that Germany or Chancellor Scholz to some extent hasn't really communicated that Germany is doing quite a lot, but also because a lot of this help seemed to have only arrived after a lot of pressure had been put on Germany because there has been so much criticism. So at times it almost felt as if Germany was helping kind of against their will, kicking and screaming, something like that, which isn't quite correct. But I think this is the paradox, that somehow it has always taken the German political realm a few weeks too long to decide something. And also, maybe last point, we have this tendency to draw these red lines and kind of outline the things that we don't want to do or we feel are escalatory, you know, and at different points there was different things. There was, you know, delivering weapons, delivering offensive weapons, delivering tanks, and at every time these lines then have been crossed. And I think this was, badly communicated, not a very strategic communication, both towards the allies and towards Russia. And so that is the criticism that I also have, and that explains, I think, why at times it really looked as if Germany wasn't doing enough while it actually has been doing enormously to support Ukraine.
Right. Well, that's good if it's actually about communication, because if the will and intent is there, you can actually easily communicate. When shifting from Germany's role in the global affairs more generally and zooming in into Germany's relations with China, Chancellor Scholz was in Beijing in April, and there's quite a bit of talk of that. Again, maybe channeling some of the discontent about the relative reluctance of Chancellor Scholz and modesty in discussions with China, not pushing China enough as China is supporting Russia with dual use in dual-use trade, for example. How would you characterize German-Chinese relations? Are they very much shaped by boardrooms and corporations, that is, by the high dependence of trade with China that Germany has? Or is there room for a more stronger stance vis-a-vis China?
There's definitely room for a stronger stance. Yes, trade relations and trade dependencies have an impact on how Germany approaches China. And I kind of struggle to criticize the German leadership too much for that because, you know, of course it is also Chancellor Scholz's role to secure kind of German economic well-being. On the other hand, you can very clearly see that the discussion on China has changed dramatically in Germany over the last few years. And we don't only have, the chancellor, we also have, say, the foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, who has been pretty vocal. She's from the Green Party, who has been pretty vocal on Chinese violations of international law, as Chinese suppression of the Uyghurs, things like that. So, and even, because you mentioned kind of cooperation and the boardrooms and all of that, interestingly enough, in the German debate, it was the German industry first and foremost, and German business first and foremost, that rang the alarm bells at one point and said, we do need to change the relationship with China because, there are issues around intellectual property, there are issues about corporate espionage, there are all kinds of issues about market access, things like that. And so I do detect definitely a change in Germany's approach to China in general. I do detect even more of an awareness of how problematic it is to be dependent and to have these vulnerabilities with or towards an authoritarian country since the 24th of February 2022, since we had this experience of Russia using our dependence on Russian gas and oil to put pressure on German society. And so there is a realization that we could run into the same problem with regard to China. So it's a bit of a glass half full, glass half empty situation, because quite honestly, a lot is changing and there's awareness. But then also there are some competing interests. And we need to be honest that this is also relatively difficult, right? As a foreign and security policy person, it's much easier to say, okay, we should be doing that, and we should diversify, we should de-risk, right? De-risking is the big term when it comes to relations with China, and that's all very true. But of course, there are also other interests there. And so I think Germany and Chancellor Scholz and this coalition government is really trying to walk a very thin line and kind of do the right thing on that. And, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong, from my point of view. But overall, as I was saying, I think things are definitely moving.
Oh, thank you for that analysis. You mentioned the slightly different approaches that are taken by Chancellor Scholz and the foreign minister, as they do represent different parties. Can you cast more light into how the activities or actions in foreign policy are actually informed by different party policy and expectations vis-a-vis the electorate and trade interests, as we are, I understand, prepping for a campaign? There will be a general election in the fall next year. Is Germany, in that sense, is Germany's domestic politics much influencing the outcomes in foreign policy, and how?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because the German political system is interesting in that regard. So first of all, we always have coalition governments, right? We don't have a two-party system, we have a multi-party system, and we always have coalition governments. In the past, it used to be two parties. This time, for the first time, more or less, we have three parties in coalition government, which makes things harder already, right? So we have the Social Democrats, Chancellor Scholz, we have the Greens, and we have the Liberal Democrats. And the way it works is that there is an understanding that the party that gets most votes, and this coalition, the SPD, gets the chancellorship, of course, and then the second largest coalition partner, gets the foreign office. And so by design, in the German system, you have a little bit of a tension between these two viewpoints. I mean, again, these are coalition governments, so of course they kind of understand each other and work together, and there's a coalition agreement and all of this, but in the end, they are different parties. And so you always have this tension, and I think this has gotten stronger in recent years with geopolitics and crises, quite honestly, geopolitical crises becoming much more immediate and much more urgent than they were, say, 20 years ago. And so already under Angela Merkel, you could see that the chancellery kind of started to get even more of a say when it came to global politics, and the foreign minister became a little bit more of a number two. So you have this tension kind of built in. At the same time, the German political system is also one of compromise. And so let's put it this way, when it works, the system can be great because it does bring together different viewpoints, which also means that more people, more elements of the population are represented, and you get a consensus point that then everybody can get behind and it works. That's great. But sometimes, of course, it also means that you may have actual tension between the different parties in the coalition, which you do have now. For example, when it comes to support of Ukraine, by the way. And things get really difficult. And also it means that sometimes discussions on these topics can get relatively loud and open, meaning that they have to be done, through the media, in the open, in the parliament, etc., which doesn't always help with strategic messaging, right? Because ideally you want to show a united front. I mean, not only, also to allies, but most importantly to opponents. And if your opponent can see that, well, there are actually disagreements even within the government, that's tricky. But, that's the political system as it is. And so far it works relatively well. But you definitely point out that there are the tensions that there are. And sometimes that can be quite difficult.
That's fascinating. Thanks for that. Now, moving from the China and the domestic politics to what is to Franco-German relations, which I think for Estonia, but for the whole EU are really crucial for a stronger European Union. So again, there too, lately, it's not a secret, there have been tensions, not just lately, but I think over a short while already. So what, on your view, is the source of tensions in the Franco-German defense relations? And would you see the Weimar Triangle between Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw a more optimistic way of bringing strong voices together in Europe now with a Tusk government in Warsaw?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm German, of course. I'm actually living in Paris. I studied in France, so the Franco-German relationship was always very close to my heart and still is. And you are right that things have been difficult lately. To be quite honest, I think, you always have these kind of chancellor-president couples. And of course, they're put together by historical accident. You never quite know who you're going to get. And unfortunately, despite the fact that both sides will deny this, it does look as if Macron and Scholz don't work super well together. I mean, of course, these are rational and good human beings and politicians, so they make it work, but it's not the greatest friendship, which is also already sad and unfortunate, let's put it this way. But that being said, so there are very important and big Franco-German defense cooperation projects. Most importantly, there's FCAS, the Future Combat Air System, and MGCS, the main ground combat tank or combat system. So an airplane plus combat cloud, drone swarms, and a new tank. And these are things that Germany and France are developing together, in the case of FCAS also with Spain. These are enormous projects, billions and billions being spent there. So this is happening. We are doing this. Sometimes it gets very difficult, but these things are moving forward. So, we are kind of going forward with this. So despite all of this, we have that. We also have a Franco-German brigade, all of that. Why is it so difficult at the moment, other than maybe a personal relationship issue? I think it's funny. So as I was saying, I've been working on these issues for quite a long time. And we always used to say France and Germany have very different strategic cultures, which was always true, but until recently was a bit of an academic statement almost, right? You could say this and fine. Over recent months, this really has translated into reality. And you could especially see this when Macron made his comment about not excluding sending ground troops to Ukraine, and then kind of making the argument about strategic ambiguity.
Did it shock, or how did it
Germany didn't get it, is my kind of, very blunt positioning, because Olaf Scholz immediately reacted, basically saying, absolutely not, impossible. We're not going to do this. NATO is not going to do this. Europe is not going to do it, which we can't really decide. But anyway, which I thought was very striking, because again, I mean, of course, he could say Germany is not going to do it. That's totally his right. Whether you want to say this so loudly is your question, is kind of your responsibility. But what I found so striking is that Macron had explained very clearly that this was about strategic ambiguity, about not telling the opponent what not to do. And the day after, or even the same day, Scholz kind of went in front of a camera and told the opponent what he wasn't willing to do, which I found really striking. And I can primarily explain by, differences in strategic culture. That's something that, the German strategic debate, if there even is one, if I want to be mean, is just very different than the French one, and sure, also in other countries. And so So that also explains that. And then just finally, because I've already been too long, on the Weimar Triangle, I think, so, you know, the saying is that Europe can't really move forward if France and Germany don't agree, which is largely true. Mainly, what is definitely true is that Europe, the EU, moves a lot faster if France and Germany agree. But Poland, of course, is another really important country, and we keep talking about how since February 2022, the center of gravity in Europe has moved towards the east. Well, bringing in Poland as a kind of more important actor in the Weimar Triangle is one way of showing that and turning that saying, if you like, into a reality. And so I think working with the new government in Warsaw in the context of the Weimar Triangle is very useful. Not only do we have a new government in Poland with which France and Germany can work more easily than the previous one, but also Poland is doing a lot when it comes to security and defense, right? Poland has doubled more or less its defense spending. They're at 4% of GDP for defense. They're buying a lot of equipment. And so they kind of have a leadership role here. So I hope that the Weimar Triangle can be one of those initiatives, if you like, to kind of put more momentum in European defense and security efforts and EU defense and security efforts. And maybe, Donald Tusk can kind of help with the interpersonal between Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron as well, as you already saw during the last meeting of the Weimar Triangle. So I think that's genuinely good news, and there isn't that much good news around. So, yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. And lastly, let me tell you that I'm a great fan of your writings on the drones and more generally the impact of technology and the future of warfare. So I couldn't not ask the question, when looking at the battle space in Ukraine, there really is an intense and unprecedented use of drones. Yeah. What does that say about the future of warfare?
This is the big question, right? So I've been, as you say, for viewers who aren't very much in this, just to kind of give you a sense, in this war, the number of drones being used is almost inconceivable. So we are talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not a million drones. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, not too long ago said that Ukraine wanted to produce 1 million drones this year. That's the numbers we're talking about. Ukraine uses, according to my latest information, 70 or so different drone systems. Just to give you a sense how this compares to what used to be our reality until recently, the German armed forces have 8 different drone systems, and there's a single drone system of which we have more than 100 drones, right? Compare this to 70 drone systems and hundreds of thousands of drones. So the way that drones, the role that drones have played in this war in Ukraine is absolutely noteworthy, and we need to kind of think about what this means. On the one hand, it means that, yes, drones are incredibly important in this war and very likely also in future wars, right? I think that seems a logical conclusion. However, we should also not forget that in quite a few instances, Ukraine uses drones because it doesn't have other means available. Drones can do many things very well, and they're being used for that. But right now, Ukraine is using drones to attack tanks, and we've all seen these YouTube videos, and it looks like this is the best tool for this. But let's be honest, most of the time, in order to attack tanks, you rather want anti-tank weapons than drones, because the likelihood of hitting and destroying a tank with a drone, I think, at this point, we have a success rate of like 20 or 30%. That's not ideal.
Sure, but Russia also uses drones.
No, absolutely. And again, so I just want to say that we shouldn't just say, there are so many drones there, clearly they're amazing, because part of the reasons why there are so many drones there is also that they are available, because we're also talking in many cases civilian-made drones that are available at mass and scale and at low prices. But other systems aren't available, and that's why they're being used. So something to keep in mind. At the same time, let's maybe not go too far and kind of think about, we as kind of Europeans and NATO, and think about what are the likely kind of military conflicts and military confrontations we will be in. Because every war has its own context. And Ukraine is special in the same way that every other war is special. Ukraine is special. It's a land war. It's a war in which air superiority is not a given. It's a Materialschlacht, so it's a kind of war in which there is a lot of mass on the battlefield, which has to do also with old Soviet stocks, we as Europeans, as NATO, may find ourselves in the future in other confrontations that look very differently. And if you think, for example, about confrontation in a kind of naval setting, all of a sudden, all of these hundreds of thousands of drones that we're talking about become much less useful, if not useless, because they can't really cross the distances you're talking about. All of a sudden, small drones, quadcopter drones, that right now are really important in Ukraine, and I'm not dismissing this, become useless, and we need much bigger drones that can fly longer and carry more systems, etc.
Or on a submarine type of.
Oh yes, naval drones are a big topic as well. So yeah, there are a number of kind of lessons to be drawn from that. Definitely, Europeans, NATO needs to invest more, well, in unmanned capabilities and remotely piloted capabilities to begin with, in more mass, pretty much in everything. The naval aspect is extremely important. Ukraine really has shown that unmanned naval systems can have a huge impact, and we need to look into this and need to look into defending against this. So there are lots of lessons there that we need to draw, and I know that ministries of defense around Europe but also around the world are looking at this very closely, and the German MOD has now a task force drone and is looking at this and anti-drone systems. So a lot of work is being done, but yeah, we need to do this quite fast.
Very good. Ulrike Franke from the ECFR, thank you very much for joining me in this speed discussion of foreign policy of Estonian Council on Foreign Relations. And for the listeners, I think if there is one takeaway, we should all invest in drone companies.
Well,
thank you.
And in anti-drone companies.
Probably that too.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.